for today. Today, again, as I mentioned, we have Allan Stear joining us from the UK. Allan is a senior trainer and consultant for the Marval Group. He has strong IT service management and consultancy skills based on the ITIL framework and ISO IEC 20000 standard. Allan is an ITIL expert and accredited trainer for ITIL Foundation and Managers Bridge certificates. His key competencies include sound presentation and training skills for ITSM process, tool, and service improvement, plus facilitating and leading workshops. Allan has over 15 years experience in IT training, ITSM industry contributor, and we're thrilled to have him join us today. So with that, I will turn it over to Allan. Allan, take it away.
Thank you very much indeed. Good afternoon, folks. I just want to sort of kick off my session really. Obviously, you can see that the title slide, IT service management reporting. It's a massive area and one that, sometimes drives people to distraction. So some of the challenges, apart from the nuts and bolts pieces of information that I think most people are fairly familiar with, some of the challenges really. We're in a difficult industry, constantly up against trying to sell the value of IT or information services, and so some of the areas that I don't think there's enough guidance on is maybe how to do things like sell some of the benefits back to the business or the organisation. So some of the areas I'll look at in my my session, things like how to demonstrate and sell the value to the board. All right, so a lot of the time we see people standing up in front of boards that are there to make decisions on high-level service information, and what we tend to provide is very detailed technology-type metrics and information. So that's one of the challenges. Why figures like 99.999% availability don't really add any value to the bottom line. Right? When we're talking about service availability, it's a slightly different issue. How to report on the performance of your ITIL processes. Again, there's a lot of guidance on specific types of reports, but actually, we're about process improvements. So we're going to consider some of those areas. And also, what are the key metrics to identify essential service improvements? Traditionally, in the industry, we're not very good at actually pushing through and making service improvements happen. Well, that obviously starts with ideas and suggestions. So we need to capture those and put them into some sort of terms that the business can understand in terms of benefits. And then finally, what are the essential metrics and classifications you need to collect and exploit? And it's a bit of a powerful, you need to statement, but in terms of how you categorize things, all the management information really stems from this one area. And again, those of you that are responsible for maybe managing the way tools are set up and what you can get out of it, you'll recognize the importance of good, sound classifications. Okay, so I'll try not to go on too much. I'll just try to go on to the next slide here, which it obviously wants to stay on that slide.
I think you might be also able, Allan, to right-click if you don't have if the controls aren't working. Maybe if you right-click, I'm sure Jamie or Wanda may also know there's sometimes different ways to do the advance the slides if it's not working for you.
Okay. Yeah,
oh, there you go.
No, I think it just needed waking up, that's all. Okay, apologies for that. Okay, so we'll look at IT service management, service reporting. Just a quick one if you've never come into contact with Marval before. As cheesy as it looks, the Marval one-stop shop, we genuinely do provide and have done for a long time, for more than 20 years. We've been IT service management specialists. It's all we do. Right, we don't get involved in other areas. So we offer a service desk software solution, educational consultancy on best practice or good practice ITIL and ISO 20000. We also run things like support skills courses and workshops for the more the sort of people-focused areas. And then clearly we also produce our tool, which is branded as MSM, Marval Service Management. So we offer support and training on that side of things. So genuinely, we're a one-stop shop supplier, and we deal with the people, process, and technology side of things. Anyway, that's enough about Marval. So think about I'd like to just think about what IT, I'll use that term across the board really, IT traditionally provide. So when you go to your managers or your teams and you say, right, give us some meaningful information. You got this, you spent a lot of money on fantastic tools. You've got these, these fantastic consoles around providing lots of real-time valuable information. And what do we come up with? we come up with things like the numbers and volumes. Yeah, I've logged a load of requests or incidents, tasks, changes, etc. We might get some statistics on those that we've solved. We've put some dates around that as well. And then we also get maybe some, well, what I'll call perception metrics. I'd like to come back to that because that's a really key area. In other words, we focus a lot of our reporting on what is perceived at the outset of an interaction. And what I mean by that is when an incident gets logged or registered, we look at what the service affected and maybe what the symptom that the customer is relaying at that point. Okay, so again, we focus a lot of our reporting information on those two areas. We might also look at maybe some component information, so configuration items. Have we got availability stats on end-to-end service? Well, again, in the industry, we tend to focus on the actual individual components. When we're talking about service level management, so we might have some SLA target performance, and what we tend to have is some fairly dry information on where we've met or not met those targets. Great stuff. Where does that provide any improvement information? And then we might also supplement it with some customer surveys. And again, in the industry, we're not particularly great at wording these so that we get get a response. For those of you that have sent out surveys, will be tearing your hair out probably. You might get a 20 to 40% return rate. So we also supplement those with the rest of the information with things like surveys. So that's the traditional view. I can't see your faces there, but I'd be surprised if a lot of you weren't sort of nodding your head and say, yeah, we produce those. Well, that's fine. We do. I'm not denying that we need that information, but it doesn't provide really any improvement metrics. What we did, certainly in the UK, we did a survey at one of the ITSM events, and we asked people to identify why is reporting or management information seen as difficult? Why don't we do it? And these were some of these are the top responses. These weren't all the responses. These are the printable and publishable ones. So first of all, the information is difficult to collect. Fair enough. Too time consuming to enter and classify the data. It takes too long to produce reports. Maybe we don't have the right IT service management tools, or, and I think this is probably more relevant, they're not set up correctly. We don't know what the business wants. Again, how often do we provide information that we think is relevant and actually it's really not what the business needs? Number 6, we've always done it like that. Now there are certain organisations where it's just institutionalised. That's the way it will happen. Number 7, the customer doesn't know what they want. So how can we provide that? And number 8, pretty much it's the lethargy or the apathy side of things. What's in it for me? Why should I contribute? And if there are no consequences or no actions, then you can pretty much stand on that side of the fence, and I could argue the case for that all day long. Number 9, I can fix it quicker than the time it takes to record it. Interesting one. And number 10, poor classification and process. So within the industry, that's what's out there. These are some of the reasons why people can't get the information they need, or they don't get the information they need.
And Alan, quick question. So either from this survey or from experience or a combination of both, any of those 10 or a couple of those 10 would you say are predominantly the reasons?
Well, let's exclude number 8 from that. They're all as prevalent as the rest, really. Probably number 10, poor classification and process. Either we don't have the process or we don't enforce the process, so therefore the right type of information at the right time isn't populated. And to be honest, that kind of links right back to number 9 as well. I can fix it quicker than the time it takes to record it. So on their own, their arguments are absolutely fine. No, not an issue. But when you look at the big picture, actually they don't really stack up. So. So let's just think about, what I would encourage you to do. There are a couple of slides that I'll go through today, guys, and I'd like you just to have a quick think about these, really. Obviously, if this was a face-to-face session, I'd be grilling you and we'd be putting things up on flip charts. But we've got to understand, first of all, management information and reporting metrics and whatnot. What actually generates management emotion in your organisation? Right, so that's one of the key sort of questions you've got to ask, because it's pointless putting through information and passing information on in reports, statistics, tables, if actually they don't push the right buttons. So it's understanding what generates emotion. And what we talk about emotional, we're not getting all weepy on this side of things. All we're saying is what will actually trigger some sort of emotion, decision, or even just even reaction, really. So some of the areas that we know do trigger emotion. Certainly, if you go up in front of the board, for example, and you mention things like brand credibility or maybe organisational political credibility, anything that affects those, people often take notice of. Customer loyalty reinforcement. It's a cut and thrust world out there, and if we're going to keep our customers, then that's something we should be aiming at. Obviously, revenue, anything that we can identify as loss reduction or cost savings, they go hand in hand. And then also just to the bottom, infrastructure and service reliability. Anything that can identify that this is a reliable service or package of services, and also making the team look good. Nobody will knock you for making the team or your boss look good. So those are some of the things that we know can trigger some sort of reaction. I'll use an example, brand credibility. Did a work for one customer where the brand was absolutely everything, and the managers were kind of struggling to get through, actually taking notice of information. As soon as we translated that into terms of this may compromise the brand, then suddenly it was clearly the right button to push. Very powerful sort of message. So I'd like to think about this. Again, you might have seen examples of this before, but I'll just use this example as an idea, really. So major flower retailers, ICT, reported 99.2% ordering service availability for last quarter. On the face of it, that's the typical thing that ICT would provide. We talk about availability, and on the face of it, is that good or bad? Depends on what your targets are. However, when you then put that into some context, the 0.8% service outage happened to occur just prior to Mother's Day, right? So not a great period in terms of the business year or the business calendar. However, in terms of their revenue, it did account for 18% of their annual revenue. So a 0.8% unavailability on its own isn't particularly significant. As soon as you put context around that, that becomes much more powerful. So, and excuse the pun on this one. But, so that genuinely is an example of where a traditional ICT reporting or management information approach does make us look a little bit amateurish. So let's just think about the service experience chain. So I'm not going to get all sort of heavy on you here, but let's think about what we actually perceive by some of this. So if, for example, from an external customer point of view, and I've translated this into kind of external emotional metrics. So your billing service is lousy, and the information I requested is already 2 weeks overdue. Yeah, I mean, hopefully that's not too common a type occurrence, but as far as the customer's aware, that's what we need to sort of portray. From an internal point of view, we might be using the service, and actually it's never available, but when it is, it's a bit slow. So again, those are sort of that's an experience from an internal point of view. And I'm absolutely not disputing that we need this sort of information. The internal operational metrics, what we would tend to provide from an IT point of view, would be some sort of availability stat on maybe the actual server or part of the network or part of the infrastructure. So clearly, if we were providing the bottom one there, if we were providing those metrics, as we tend to do, back up to senior management, that would mean absolutely nothing to them. They don't really care. However, when it affects things like perception, brand, credibility, and reliability, then that's the right button to push up in the top section there. So how can we get people to actually take notice? It's put it in the terms that they will understand. And one of the critical things here is, and I'm quite glad that ITIL or ITIL has taken this on board and grabbed hold of it a little bit more, is actually let's build this into the service design up front. All right, make sure we design it in. Don't suddenly decide to decide on what we need to provide after you've actually modelled your new and changed services. It needs to be built in at source. So there's another area that it's fairly contentious, really. Service level management and agreements. What we tend to have is the customers, obviously blame the supplier and vice versa. And quite a lot of the time, what we actually do, just looking at the bottom section there, we've got to ask ourselves, why would staff buy in to a black and white system of delivery? In other words, success, failure. And often we do make the targets up on the fly. And I don't mean by minute by minute. What I'm talking about there is we negotiate an SLA, something changes, and actually we don't go back and reevaluate it. So it's just a little example then. So when you're doing things like service level agreement reporting, let's look at what are the actual underlying reasons. And if you don't use this in your existing tools, I'm sure there's not a complicated way of forcing these to be put in. This is saying, well, what were the actual reasons for our SLA breaches? So why did they go over their agreed times? And this is something that obviously you need to do either at the time or sort of retrospectively. Traditionally, if you've got to trawl through thousands of records, this information is difficult to get out. If you do it at the time when the breach occurs, dead easy, really simple to do. Obviously, you've got to police these. So, maybe some of the reasons were down to the customer not getting back, when they were supposed to. Don't forget an SLA, a service level agreement. That's the key word there. So it's not just a supplier delivering a service or providing a service. The customer has responsibilities as well. So those sorts of things will identify or will enable us to ask the questions, well, if the breaches were down to customer delays, which customers were they? And then, therefore, it allows you to go and do, first of all, raise awareness, maybe do some business relationship management reviews, and follow up on the details. Equally, which third-party suppliers were causing the delays or the breaches. Again, we can feed that into our supplier reviews and do something about it, and maybe review the contract side of things. And then, obviously, is the SLA realistic? Again, this is down to maybe we negotiated it at one point, things have changed, and we haven't gone back and renegotiated the SLA. Therefore, how are we possibly going to deliver against something that isn't fit for purpose? So I really just want to, this next section really just talks about useful data. So again, I'm sure you've all got great IT service management tools. This really is the crux of how useful or how cumbersome actually getting the information out can be. So the way that we always sort of promote things is let's look at high-level classification structure, categorization, or whatever you want to call it. Every request that you deal with, so whether it's an incident, a change, a problem, service request, it's got to be categorized, right? And whatever you call them is neither here nor there. Broadly speaking, we need to identify the business service and then the symptom, or maybe the functional activity that we're undertaking. So, the reason I say perception metrics is when you're raising or logging an incident, all you have at that point, unless you do some sort of advanced diagnosis, is to say, what was the customer trying to do? What did they experience? Right, so that's perception metrics. And if we exclusively use those, then all we're going to get is management information based on perception, which sounds kind of obvious. Whereas really what we need to do, we need to combine those. We need to combine them with things like the root cause or maybe the resolution or action taken. This is reality. This is actually saying, right, we've done the investigative work and we've identified what was underneath, what was actually causing this. Nobody's saying that the perception metrics aren't important, because when you're communicating with the customer, absolutely, you need to talk in terms of what they're experiencing. However, from an improvement point of view, and traditionally, I think it's always been under problem sort of management and analysis. I think with really the elevation of continual service improvement, I think it's improved the the status of some of these classifications. Root cause and resolution, absolutely critical. And then down the bottom, probably the area that we do least of in the industry, suggested service improvements or continual improvement metrics. So what we're saying here is, right, so we log the issue, we identify what was wrong, we fix it, we get the customer up and running in the case of an incident, and then what we then expect some magical, to magic out of the air suggested service improvements or continual improvement information. Now, that information, as you'll appreciate, is quite difficult to get out unless people are providing it or at least structuring the information to enable you to pull this information out easily. So we'd always suggest putting that in place. At least it then encourages people to raise improvements. And I'll come on to that in a moment. So that's I would call that the basics. Then we've got things like process improvement flags. So as well as identifying the root cause, I'll just go back to that previous screen. So we identify the root cause when we actually do apply the resolution. There's standard things on the left-hand side you can see, service flow or maybe lack of disk space. Maybe some of these are a little bit sort of basic. However, all we're populating to deal with that with the actual incident classifications, we're just putting in the left-hand root causes. What we can also do is associate an affected process area. Now, it's not always possible. There's no getting away from the fact that actually, if you're a certain type of process owner or manager, you're going to have to do a bit of interrogation, right? And then that's where your IT service management tool will give you what you need, or it will fall short of the mark. Now, if you structure that so it's got two elements inside each of these root causes, one, the root cause itself, and secondly, the affected process, it then just gives you something to focus on, pull that information out, report on it, search on it, and you can then identify all the issues affecting, for example, the capacity process. Not that you couldn't do it already, it just makes life a lot easier and actually encourages process improvements, which is what it's all about. So, bit of a busy slide, this one. You can go on and on as much as you like on that one, really. So what we're recommending then, and again, we've got a lot of customers using this very successfully. I will say, I think that ITIL or ITIL has only really just caught back up with what ISO 20000 kind of, the spirit of ISO 20000, which is all about continual service improvements. Thankfully now it's caught up, and in some areas it's actually given some really good guidance on it now. Whereas, I think this is one of the practical areas where I think people struggle. So what we're saying here is, at the end of that request lifecycle, so the incident or whatever it is, let's just identify, could we improve anything in the in the grand scheme of things, from the experience of from start to finish, what could actually be improved? And again, you could identify who's the best person to actually complete this information. It isn't after the event; it's the person that's actually doing it right there and then.
And Allan, could you talk a little bit more about how these flags are actually used?
Yeah, absolutely. So all in practice, really, it's just a case of forcing one of these classifications to be populated at the resolution point. And again, I'm sure most of your service management tools are capable of mandating information. So, in other words, you are not permitted to resolve a call of whatever type it is until you've put this information in. So we'd always recommend forcing this at the resolution point of view, and then the person that resolves the request, the incident or whatever it is, just puts in one of these little flags. Now it could be that follow-up not required, and for 95, 96, 97% of the time that will be the case. It's those odd occasions where we do need to do some follow-up. And how often do we sit there and we go through something, shake our heads, have a bit of a moan, and say, "Oh, this is a bit naff. We could do this so much better," and that's where it stops. It just, it's a bit of a mutter to somebody else. It doesn't then get followed up. If you capture this information, then the relevant process owners or the people responsible can actually follow it up. And I don't care what you say, the person resolving the issue is definitely the best placed person to do that. Right, that's what those flags are all about. Now you're starting to get into real sort of more advanced information management information, and this is talking about what about the root service. Yeah, okay. This does some people's heads in, the idea of putting this information in. So let's just use the scenario then. The customer reported an issue with the online ordering service. So as far as they're concerned, that is what they were trying to use. So they were using some sort of business function, and they were trying to use the online ordering service. So that's what, from a business point of view, we should be reporting those things back. Absolutely. However, when we investigate that, we identify that the underlying cause was down to the payment service, an underpinning infrastructure service or component. Now, how often do we do our management information purely based on the top part? Yeah, online ordering service will report that we've got loads of issues with that, and the perception, therefore, is that the online ordering service is flaky, it's underperforming, or it's not fit for purpose, and quite rightly so. From a customer point of view, that's absolutely fine. We do need to understand what the underpinning actual cause was. So as well as the root cause itself, is the root service. Now, those of you who've tried to map in things like service catalogues and identify you've got business-facing services or customer-facing services, and you've got underpinning infrastructure or maybe technical services, then this is where this information really becomes valuable. Obviously, from an outside point of view, they don't really need to know about which infrastructure service it was. But from us within IT, that's absolutely critical. We need to get the finger on the pulse of what's actually happening. So we do need to know about both areas, and without wishing to get all sort of forceful on you, really, this then changed the full classification structure views ever so slightly. So we're not disputing. Yeah, we've got business service symptom at the top, the perception metrics. Then we've got the reality metrics: root cause, resolution, and root service. What is actually causing the underlying issue? And then, once again, we've got suggested service improvement. So with that structure, you can get a hell of a lot of management information out that actually means something. It then enables you to communicate with the customers in their own language, and from the board point of view, that's absolutely fine. From an IT management point of view, it's this root service really that's the critical thing. Because don't forget, you could then be dependent on suppliers or maybe other teams that are underpinning this, or technology. This is where you then start to identify the reality, what's actually causing things, and you can make some improvements. Then we've got a number of different areas. So, I mean, I'll just use a few examples. I'm not going to go into all the sort of process or service areas, but let's just think about what's actually important. And again, we talk about management information on incidents, and we often talk about just totals. We might have a little bit more descriptive information around them, but let's look at things like what the resolution times are. If we're trying to improve the process, we need to identify how long that process takes, where the bottlenecks were, and probably more importantly, the actual time spent. So resolution time from start to resolution, that's fine, but what about the accumulated time spent? And what we're talking about there is, I might have had an incident in my queue for 2 hours. However, 3 of my colleagues worked on that for an hour apiece. So therefore, my resolution time might say, indeed, 2 hours. However, if I look at the accumulated time spent, that might be 4, 5, 6 hours, depending on what the issue is. So really, if we're talking about improving service and how we deliver that, and understanding the impact of incidents, time spent is absolutely the way to go. Obviously, we need to combine that with what the types of classifications, how do we break them down, and then that gives us a lot of information as usual for things like your trending, your problem management. So breaking it down by what types of issues you're having. What about things like change reasons and failures? Again, it all comes back to one of those issues that I displayed in the very beginning, which was the top 10 areas or reasons why people didn't provide that information or thought the information was difficult. It really does rely on good, proper process and also people following it. And if that means taking a few extra seconds to fill in some information, then so be it. As far as I'm concerned, the argument of someone saying, it took me 5 seconds to fill that piece of information out. If they can turn around to you and say, I resolved 100 issues a day, therefore 100 times 5 seconds is actually a small piece of time, not an issue. In reality, what we find in the industry is most people are resolving between 0, 10, 15, 20, depends on the job role. So actually, those 5 seconds are absolutely bugger all. In the grand scheme of things, they mean very little. But yet we let them get away with not putting the information in. So let's just focus on what are the reasons why we're doing change. Why do we need to make change in the organisation? And then also reschedules. How often are we rescheduling things? Does it mean that our planning isn't quite up to what it could be? Other process areas, again, I'm not going to go mad through all of these, but let's just think about our change and release management side of things. Is the process suitable? Do we have the right level of control in there? Have we actually got the right level of bureaucracy in there? Does it give the business what they need? What about things like success and failure rate? Okay, it's a black and white metric, but it identifies, it's a very quick barometer on how our process is actually performing. And then let's also then think about selling sort of benefits back. Do we actually sell our benefits of when we're doing things like change and releases? Do we sell them back in real terms so that the business can actually understand them?
And Allan, can you just expand on that a little bit? How can real benefits be ensured? So what do you mean by that, and how do we ensure that there actually are real benefits as part of this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, things like sort of change success and failure rates. Now, those of you that are getting involved in change and release management will know that the consequence of changes and releases failing, or at least the unplanned issues that come off the back of them, actually we don't capture those in real terms very often. So putting things like controls in place where a change management process maybe forbids non-essential changes from happening. In other words, where the technicians say, well, we've got something bright and shiny and new, so therefore we must use that, unless we can put that back in real benefits, sell it back in sort of real benefits, then we really shouldn't be making any changes to the infrastructure, because that's what it's all about. We shouldn't be making changes that don't sell anything, that don't give us anything back in sort of real terms. So cost savings, resource savings, reduction of expenditure, or maybe things like stability. So it's all to do with making sure that the change management process or the release process enforces only change that it's absolutely necessary. And again, we do need to include things like real benefits in the actual process. So when we communicate and tell people why they're happening, we need to make sure that it's the customers have got something in for them. Other process areas, obviously, to gauge how effective our configuration management process, something that's very reliant on other people here. What's the sort of audit reports? Are things actually being updated successfully? Have we got a good handle on what's actually out there within our CMDB? And this is where we can identify if the data is wrong, it's going to be caused somewhere by a process not actually working. So it just gives us the means to go back and identify which process is causing that. Obviously, I've talked about things like service level breach reasons and those sorts of things. But we do need to identify what the causes of those breaches are, and whether that's internally or maybe a supplier. So I'm trying to move this on. That's better. Yeah, and just some other process areas. Outage tracking. Quite often from an availability point of view, we're great at doing component analysis. Service availability is another thing, and I've very rarely come across some good examples of proper service availability statistics. I'm not disputing there are lots of monitoring tools which will give you lots of information on component availability, but service availability is a different thing. Again, that needs to be structured into the service management tool and actually give you that information back. Obviously, capacity point of view, we've identified deficiencies. From a reactive point of view, we can identify where capacity issues are causing things like incidents. But we'll only get that information if we classify the things correctly. So it all comes back to that common ground of classifying things and also enforcing, policing those classifications as well, as opposed to just letting them happen and let people just do what they like. Without going mad on some of the other areas, we know about identify security. I mean, security, thankfully, is a very sort of visible area these days. But okay, we identify the threats and breaches. But what about, let's compare the resource that we actually need to expend. In other words, to actually manage those risks and threats. Right. What I would like you to do, just if you take nothing else away from the session, reports that you either have to produce, are asked to produce, or are presented with. I'd like you just to evaluate them in these sort of terms. So I'll group some of these together really. So first of all, ask yourself, what does the report tell me? Sounds like a really stupid question. However, quite often you can look at something and a combination of not being really obvious, or you just don't understand what the statistics are actually saying. Obviously, that then maps back to, let's consider what the audience is and what are their drivers. It all goes back to emotional metrics again. Are the results a surprise? Most of the time, we've got a pretty good handle on why things are happening. If we're suddenly expecting certain trends to happen and the results don't back that up, that could be a number of things. But again, areas for going investigation to go and investigate. Critically for me, do they highlight areas for improvement? And then on the flip side, or the positive side of things, do they highlight our areas of success? In other words, have we actually got information to either back up a decision or justify maybe some investment? Can it actually, or demonstrate that you're actually doing a good job? What do they tell the person who needs them? Again, this is where you need to press the right buttons with the right information. I'm not condoning cooking the books. However, just the way that we present that information back can drastically affect how it's received on the decisions that it triggers. So, therefore, does it actually trigger a decision or an action? Clearly, one of the reasons that we do reporting is to make sure that we can identify and measure whether we are achieving targets or meeting goals. And fundamentally, do we actually need this report? Oops, sorry about that one. And I would always say, look at any of the reports, ask yourself those questions, and if there's a strong enough case for not fulfilling some of those areas, then have a good hard look at what the report actually does, and ask yourself if you really need it. I acknowledge the fact that some things are out of your control. Governance and all sorts of controls are in place. That's fine. You can't do anything about that. I just kind of leave you with a few other thoughts, really. And in ICT and IT, we're not great at this. So, and it all affects reporting and the management information. So, every manager has a responsibility to demonstrate their team's valuable contribution to the business or organisation. Nice and straightforward. But having said that, how many times do we have team leaders, managers, who don't really provide any evidence that their team is contributing to the bottom line of the business? And what do we see? What's the consequence? People get outsourced, we get cutbacks and all that sort of thing. Right, so some of it can be avoided if every manager takes that responsibility on. Equally, and I apologise, it's a bit wordy this one, every team member also has a responsibility to be obviously accountable, but provide the right information in order for their manager to make informed decisions and to demonstrate their team's valuable contribution to the business as well. It's both ways. Right, it's not, neither of them magically happen on their own. And for me, this is probably the most important bit about the management information and reports. If you or the person that actually needs it or receives it can't or haven't made the decision from the collected data, don't waste your time collecting it. Genuinely, if there's no benefits, if you can't see any benefits, then all you're doing is just churning out information for the sake of it. So let's just think about, let's focus on what's actually important to the recipients, the people that actually need this information. And I'm not disputing you can have the same information published in a slightly different way, translated into the right language that the person who needs that information will actually understand and trigger some emotion. Let's just think about continuous service improvement in the organisation. Let's think about suggested service improvements, root cause, root service. There's nothing wrong with getting people to take a little bit longer to put the information in if we're going to get the benefits out the back of it. whatever you do, design the metrics in early on. Yeah, don't try and think about crowbarring things in after the event. It's nigh on impossible to do, or takes a lot of engineering. And then don't waste time on meaningless statistics. Now, obviously, this is easier said than done. If you're the person who's having to produce those, years and years ago, I had to do a report, and I knew that my information wasn't getting read, so I just stuck a few rude words in the middle of the report, and just to see what reaction it actually gained. It didn't gain any reaction at all, so that told me that it was never being read. So I stopped doing it, and nothing ever happened after that. It didn't really help the bottom line, but it just meant that actually somebody was collecting a lot of good information, and it really wasn't being used. And for me, the resolving stuff. When I say the resolving stuff, I mean the people that actually complete the information in these records. So the incident resolvers, the people completing the changes. They can make or break your data depending on how much attention they pay to the information itself. Right. So we really should think about when we classify things. Let's have the right classifications in there, review them to make sure they're current, and actually make sure that they ensure that they provide something back to the business in business terms, or at least that we can recognize them, and then, like I say, translate that into the language that actually means something. I'd like to just sort of finish my session there. Obviously, there's an opportunity for any questions. Hopefully, my accent and the speed I was speaking didn't detract from what was I think some really powerful some messages in there. Obviously, we've got our own details on there.
Yeah, fantastic, Alan. So a couple things. I just want to make sure we just give everyone a chance to ask some questions. I know it is 12:45, so we just want to make sure that if anybody has any questions, you post them right now. There's a couple things. One is there's a comment that Tony had posted, and it was back to a few slides back about asking questions, and I guess he kind of quipped that perhaps you should add the old saying, "Don't ask a question if you don't want to hear the answer." So Tony just kind of added that. In addition to that, Robin asks if you could just sum up a few specific metrics that they should collect.
Well, for me, I would come back to. I'm just trying to think what sorry, let me just come out of there. Go back to my home page. Oh, maybe I can't. Okay. For me, obviously, we know we need to collect totals. And that, nobody disputes that. You need to understand, what's the barometer of your workload, but put that into some sort of context. So that's why I would always say, for me, my key metrics, say from an incident management point of view, we need to know totals. We also need to know the root causes. So if you don't collect anything else, identify the underlying root causes of why things are happening, and also combine that with the time spent. If you combine those, then that gives you some means of actually improving something. Change management, for example, I would say that the critical areas for that area are what were the benefits recognized. And again, if we can't translate changes into business benefits or improvement benefits, then really we shouldn't be making changes at all. So again, in the classification structure of your changes, no different to anything else, just put some high level sort of business benefits in there, and then pass that back out and communicate that back out to your sort of your community. Aside from that, well, I mean, for me, ISO 20000 provides almost like the minimal critical requirements for sort of reporting metrics, and it goes through things like your totals, but it also identifies the reasons why components are failing. So I think ISO 20000 has got some really good guidance on that side of things. Apart from everybody, the problem with reporting is everybody's got their own requirements on it. It all depends on what the emotional drivers are in the organisation. I don't know. Is there
I think that's great. And if there's any other questions around that, obviously a couple ways is obviously contact directly through Marval to get to Allan, or Allan's got the contact information up there right now that will also direct any of the questions directly through our ThoughtRock folks, and we'll make sure they get over to Allan as well. So hopefully you answer the question. If not, you can reach out and get some more information. So just again, thanks a lot, Allan. I wanted to just make sure again everybody before they head off to realize again that next week We are taking a break in terms of our Thought Rock Live, as our team will be at the Fusion Conference in Washington. So again, it's booth 718. If you're there, please stop by and say hi. And then the following week on October 4th is when we do have Don Page of the Marval Group talking about ITIL v3 in 6.5 minutes. So stay tuned. Again, all that information is still available in Thought Rock and your weekly newsletter. More information on that session. And again, this presentation with audio and the components of the PowerPoints will all be available in Thought Rock within the next 24 hours. So if you need to go back and review it, you can do it at that time. And again, I appreciate everyone for joining us again today. Thanks for another great session. And Allan, we appreciate it, and hopefully we can have you back sometime.
Excellent. Thanks very much.
Okay, we'll leave the screen up with the contact information as we close out our audio component here for anybody that's trying to contact us or put the information down on a piece of paper. We'll leave that up for a few minutes, but other than that, have a great rest of the week, and hopefully we'll see some folks at Fusion. Take care. Bye, Allan.
Thanks. Bye-bye.